Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Axelson. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm Vice President of Advocacy at the Women's Sports Foundation. I'm a white woman with short brown hair in a light blue and white patterned shirt, sitting in a room with white walls and a blue sign behind me with wording that says, all girls, all women, all sports. Welcome to today's town hall conversation, the next 50 years, expanding access and redefining sport, a virtual town hall conversation in honor of the 50th anniversary of Title IX. This town hall is the third in our series, which we will continue through the fall. And these conversations will examine the themes identified in our newest research report, Title IX at 50, We're Not Done Yet, which was released this past May. If you've missed any of these conversations, please be sure to check out WSF's YouTube channel where recordings will be shared, including today's. We'd like to thank our partner, TIAA, for supporting these important conversations. Please be sure to check out their Retire Inequality campaign, and we'll drop a link in the chat in a few. Live captions are available for this discussion, and if you don't currently see them, you may need to turn them on in your Zoom app, or if you're watching us on the YouTube live stream, you can also turn them on there. It is such a pleasure to introduce today's discussion among a number of WSF friends and athletes whom we all deeply admire here, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. So without further ado, I am pleased to introduce today's moderator for this discussion, Patty Cisneros Prevo. She is the Diversity and Inclusion Manager at the Wisconsin School of Business, a two-time Paralympic gold medalist in wheelchair basketball, and longtime WSF friend. Patty, with that, I will hand it over to you to give further introduction and also introduce our panelists today.
All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today in this very important conversation centered around Title IX, disability and inclusion and access. Like Sarah said, thank you for the introduction. My name is Patty Cisneros Prevo. I use pronouns she and her. I am the Diversity and Inclusion Manager at the Wisconsin School of Business. I want to thank Sarah for that great introduction and our sponsor, TIAA, for sponsoring the Title IX 50th Anniversary Town Hall. I am going to start with a visual description. So I am a Mexican brown woman. I have dark, a little longer than shoulder length hair. I'm wearing long dangly red earrings, and I have a traditional Mexican blouse with red, orange, yellow, green flowers around the neck and down the chest area. And something that I also would like to start with is a land acknowledgement. I am currently at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. The University of Wisconsin-Madison occupies ancestral Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Dajope since time immemorial. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory. Decades of ethnic cleansing followed when both the federal and state government repeatedly, but unsuccessfully, sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. This history of colonization informs our shared future of collaboration and innovation. And today, the UW-Madison respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin. So please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brings us here today. And please join us in uncovering these truths every day. So without further ado, it is my honor to introduce to you today's panelist. Our first one, Scout Bassett. She uses pronouns she and her. She is a 7-time national champion, Paralympian, activist, and WSF trustee and athlete ambassador. And this bio is quite impressive. So Scout Bassett spent 7 years in a government-run orphanage in Nanjing, China, after she was abandoned on the side of a street following the loss of her right leg in a chemical fire as an infant. Given a makeshift prosthetic leg patched together from leather belts and masking tape, she never stepped outside of the orphanage, spending her days mopping floors, washing dishes, and taking care of the younger children before being adopted by an American couple in 1995. Still learning English, Bassett joined sports as a way to connect with their peers, trying basketball, softball, golf, and tennis before competitively racing in track and field and triathlons. At 14, she was introduced to the Challenge Athletes Foundation, CAF, who gave her a grant to fund her training while also allowing her to attend running clinics and mentor young amputees. Bassett is a 6-time national champion in the 100 meters, and she is currently the world record holder in the 400 meter and American record holder in the 200 meter. That's so impressive. Prior to competing in track, Bassett was on the USA Paratriathlon national team, where she won 3 silver medals and 1 bronze medal at the ITU Paratriathlon World Championships. Off the track, she spends time as a mentor, an activist for disabled people, athlete ambassador, and motivational speaker, and is a unique and inspiring role model for all people to dream big and believe. Thank you so much, Scout, for being with us here today. Next, I am super honored to introduce to you Aimee Mullins, who uses she, her pronouns. She is an athlete, actor, public speaker, consultant, and past WSF president. Aimee Mullins is a pioneer in the world of sports, fashion, and design. As the first person in the world on carbon fiber sprinting legs, she set 3 world records in track and field and was the first amputee to compete in the NCAA Division I while at Georgetown University, which she attended on a full academic scholarship from the U.S. Defense Department. She went on to collaborate with artists such as Alexander McQueen and Matthew Barney to create unique museum collection prosthetics, and was the first disabled person to land a global beauty contract with L'Oreal Paris. She has spoken around the globe on issues related to design, aesthetics, disability, and identity, and is one of the youngest women to be inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame. So we have 2 pretty badass women that I'm super excited to have this conversation with. Another piece of information I'd like to share before we begin, as the moderator, I will be navigating this conversation using identity first language as best practice from the disability justice movement. As a diversity, equity, and inclusion professional, I understand that we allow people to choose how they want to identify. And as the moderator, I will be using identity-centered language first. Also, as we move into this town hall discussion around disability, disabled athletes, access, and inclusion, we must in and beyond sport center and uplift those systemically pushed to the margins. So we are all aligned. I'd like to share a salient and a very hearty working definition of ableism, a definition provided by community lawyer, educator, activist, organizer, Talila T.L. Lewis. And I know that the definition will pop up here on the screen. So if you are a visual learner like myself, it's always helpful to see the words. Ableism is a system of assigning value to people's bodies and minds based on societally constructed ideas of normalcy, productivity, desirability, intelligence, excellence, and fitness. These constructed ideas are deeply rooted in eugenics, anti-Blackness, misogyny, colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. This systemic oppression that leads to people and society determining people's values based on their culture, age, language, appearance, religion, birth, or living place, quote unquote, health/wellness, and or their ability to satisfactorily reproduce, quote unquote, excel, and quote unquote, behave. You do not have to be disabled to experience ableism. And we share this definition of ableism because we really want it to guide our conversations and this discussion today, and remind us of the important work that still needs to be done in dismantling this oppressive system. So let's move on to the questions. I've talked a lot. I need to take a water break, so I'm going to get through this question. All right, number 1, today's conversation continues our Title IX 50th Anniversary Town Hall Series and comes just after the close of Disability Pride Month, which marked the 32nd anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA. Since their respective passages, those who identify as women and disabled athletes have taken advantage of increased opportunities to participate in sports, the ripple effect of which have carried over into professional careers and leadership roles. As we celebrate these momentous anniversaries, the need to continuously work to ensure equitable access, inclusion, and protection against sex and disability-based discrimination in sport and beyond. So my question to you, and we'll start with Scout, is, as an elite athlete and Paralympian, what has Title IX meant to you and your respective journey through sport?
Well, first and foremost, I'm so honored to be here with both of you. I admire and just respect the work which you both represent and what you've done for our community and our movement. It is really such an honor. But to answer your question, so it's going to be a bit of an unusual perspective, but not one that's unusual to people with disabilities. When I went to college at UCLA, I was able to go to college on a full merit scholarship, academic scholarship, but I was not able to earn a scholarship to compete for UCLA for athletics. And at the time I was doing triathlon and then converted to track and field my sophomore year of college. I have a disability, which is an above knee impairment. So I'm amputated from my right leg above the knee down. And this disability is quite severe in the sense that for running, I would never be able to run an able-bodied time to earn a scholarship, an athletic scholarship. So when I went to UCLA and I wanted to compete on the train with the track team, not even compete, they said no, because I'm not part of the team, I'm not on scholarship. I couldn't even train at the times that they trained at the stadium. And so it was quite difficult to figure out how to navigate that. And what it made me realize is that going to college, and as I'm mentoring now young girls, I've since completed university, that opportunities for women athletes with disabilities to go to school and compete or train with the university to earn a scholarship, an athletic scholarship, is little to almost none. And I know Amy will have a slightly different perspective because I think she might have ran or trained with the team in school. But if you have a more severe impairment where you would not be able to run or have an able-bodied performance, it makes it almost impossible to earn an athletic scholarship. So that's really what's motivated me today to work with the Women's Sports Foundation to continue to push for opportunities for young women to be able to earn athletic scholarships, to train, to compete. So that's why my experience is really pushing what I'm passionate about today.
Thank you so much, Scout, for sharing those experiences with you. Yes, Amy, I'd love to hear how Title IX has really shaped your life and your respective journey with sport. Oh, and I think you're muted.
There we go. There's that mute button. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. And it is an honor as well to be here with you, Patty and Scout. For a visual description, I am a white woman. I have a blonde ponytail. I'm wearing a black t-shirt, and I'm sitting on a striped couch with some trees in the background, and hopefully not a garbage truck that might be imminent. So Title IX, the truth is, I was completely ignorant about Title IX until my very first time I came to the Women's Sports Foundation annual gala. And I was 21 at that time. I had a huge profile in the inaugural issue of Sports Illustrated for Women, and was invited to New York City. It used to be at the Waldorf Astoria, and incredible. I'm standing there between Nadia Comaneci and Jackie Joyner-Kersee and Billie Jean King, and they had a video play about the role of the pioneers, Billie among them, and many other women, in getting Title IX to law. And that was the first time I'd ever heard of it. I thought that I played sports my whole life because I was good enough. So first of all, the necessary need to keep educating future generations of girls and women about the tremendous amount of work that was done before us, so that it's a law. We have a right, at least we have a legal statute that we can hold our tax-paying or tax revenue receiving institutions accountable. Scout, I did not actually have a athletic scholarship. I too had an academic scholarship to Georgetown, but I did compete and train with the team, which I think was only possible because my coach is a living legend. Frank Gagliano in the track world is a living legend. And I really think that the fact that his curiosity was piqued, the fact that I didn't know anything really about how to train for track. I grew up, I played softball, I swam, I team sport, I skied, but I loved team sports. So track and field was a complete jump into the deep end of, I don't know what this is for me. And he had never trained an athlete with a disability. So in our mutual ignorance, we decided to see what happened. He was going to train me the way he trained everyone else, which is exactly what I wanted. I didn't want to feel separated from the team, which is the case for so many athletes with disabilities. And I certainly, growing up playing sports, I encountered so much resistance. Childhood softball coaches, and we were on a league championship team. He didn't want me on that team. And I figured out with my wooden legs how to steal second base because the girl guarding second base was afraid to get the wooden legs into her shins. It was like you figure out what your little advantages are. But it also because you know that you're not wanted because you're seen as a drag in some way. You're seen as like, you're going to pull people down instead of figuring out what special talents can you offer the whole, because that's the truth about any team. Nobody can do it all. We all have our strengths, and we figure out how to pool those resources. So the fact that Frank Gagliano kind of gave me a very public blessing by having me join this Division I team, I think set a great tone for the next few decades, whereas coaches that would have been part of that old guard that would still feel very resistant to an athlete with a disability being integrated into their team were, he could kind of shame them, which is sometimes necessary, to say this isn't right, and this isn't a huge accommodation you're needing to make. And even if it were, this is 1 in 4 Americans. 1 in 4 Americans has a disability, 1 in 5 around the world. So it's a massive amount of our population. It cuts through every other group in our country when we want to talk about intersectionality. And we know that because Title IX is about all girls and women, there is no subset of girls and women with disability. It is our right as well as everyone else to have access and opportunity to compete. And we know that it has the same benefits for us, and maybe even more so, because the autonomy in our body, being able to literally find our voice, being, I got it, it's me over here, to own your space on a track or on the playing field of any kind is a milestone in the development of any child. But we know this, that because of our societal constructs, girls experience so many more barriers to these benefits. So it's of crucial importance that when we talk about the progress of Title IX and where we still need to go, that we remember it isn't an us and them. We're not other. We're not an asterisk or a subset. We are girls and women.
Thank you so much, Amy, for sharing that. There were so many like tidbits. I took notes that really resonated with me. When I think about Title IX, it really allows me an opportunity to acknowledge, celebrate, and honor the histories of these people who identify as women and girls, but particularly those with these intersecting identities that have yet another layer of oppression or obstacles to deal with. I'm talking about women with disabilities and women and girls who identify within the LGBTQ spaces, women and girls of color. And when I think about Title IX, I am all three. I'm a woman, I am a person of color, and I have a disability. And so for me to be able to recognize, yes, the giants that started the Title IX movement, but even those smaller giants, the quieter giants that are women of color, LGBTQ plus women, disabled women that don't get the showcase, don't get the spotlight in what they've done for the movement and the efforts that they put forward so that those who identify as women and girls can have equal access to sport and continue to do what they want to do in that sporting world. So thank you both for that. We're going to continue. Question 2, and we'll start with you again, Scout. The Women's Sports Foundation's 50 years of Title IX report shares that since Title IX, 3 million more high school individuals identifying as girls and women are participating in sport. But this does not tell the full story. Both Title IX legislation and available data fail to account for and break down these opportunities across race, socioeconomic status, and disability/ability. So Scout, can you reflect on your own experiences accessing or trying to access sport at a young age, belonging to multiple underrepresented communities? And through your opportunity to be a role model and mentor, what do you see in your interactions with disabled children? And that's like a hardy question. So if you need me to repeat it, I can.
Gosh, well, as you said, I apologize. I didn't describe myself probably very well earlier, but I am Asian, Chinese specifically, and I grew up in a town of predominantly Caucasian individuals, a town of 1,600 people in the Midwest. And I'd always been active in sport and always wanted to be part of teams and activities and signed up every season of every year. And like Amy, I had so many experiences where I was largely denied the opportunity to compete and play. So I could sign up, I could show up for the practices and come to the games. But when it came to actually being in the game, within the lines, I was often told to sit on the sidelines, on the bench, and everybody else got to play except for me. And I began to form this perception that people with disabilities were lesser than, didn't belong. And what I have experienced and seen is that so much of part of my struggles with sport growing up was the fact that I was competing on an everyday walking prosthetic, which was okay, but not great for athletics or sports. And it took me until I was 14 years old before I ever found out about running prosthetics. And if you've ever seen these really cool carbon fiber sockets and blades, you know that they're very transformer, very progressive looking, but they're also very expensive and they're not covered by insurance companies. And these can cost as much as a car. And so they're very costly. And as a result, the barrier to entry for athletes with disabilities can be quite high and very expensive. And so without the Challenge Athletes Foundation getting me my first running prosthetic, I don't know that I would have ever seen a pathway to elite sports or the Paralympics. And I'm so thankful because that is what helped me to get my start. But today, what we have seen is that it's still such a huge barrier to entry for young kids and women with disabilities to get involved in sports because of the equipment costs, but then also it can be the travel costs to the competitions and the lack of funding for athletes with disabilities. And so that's been a huge challenge. But in mentoring so many of these young girls, what I have found and why I feel like there's so much more progress that can be made with Title IX is that what we see on the Olympic side is that the college program is a great feeder program for Olympic athletes and a great program that continues to develop these athletes. But if you are a women athlete with a disability, you may be able to participate or compete with your high school team. But then if you don't earn a scholarship or you don't have a coach like Amy's who is accepting and welcoming you on their collegiate program, you have almost nowhere to go after high school to continue to train, fine-tune your craft, to compete a pathway towards the Paralympics. And so as a result, we don't have a massive developmental feeder program for the Paralympics in this country. And as we look to LA 28, where they will host their first summer Paralympic Games, we've got to continue to develop that pipeline of young talent because as we have seen, the Paralympics is not yet gender equal in terms of participation or events or sports for women. And that's largely due to the fact that there aren't as many numbers of women competing. And so that's really something that I'm hoping that we can improve and we can continue to create these opportunities for women athletes with disabilities in college so that they can continue training, continue competing, and can continue that pathway of elite Paralympic sports if they want.
Yeah, thank you, Scout, for that and sharing your experiences. I have a very different experience than both you and Amy. I didn't have my disability until I was 18 when I was involved in a car accident. So as a child, I was very involved in all kinds of sports. I ran cross country and track. I did basketball, soccer, everything. But some of the things that you touched on, Scout, coming from a low income, poor family, I didn't have access to some of my counterparts because of that financial gap. I couldn't pay to play on a competitive team, or I couldn't do a sport like hockey because of the equipment fees or the financial burden that it took. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge that when we're really pushing this movement for girls to participate in sport, that we have to be mindful and very intentional on reaching those with intersecting identities, and one being, our socioeconomic status of our families and our communities, and being able to provide, equitable access to training centers and equipment and the transportation that it takes to continue that. And so after I acquired my disability, I was 18. And I think that of all the sports in the parasport world, wheelchair basketball might have the best pipeline in terms of its Paralympic opportunities. I was very much plugged into a juniors team, although I was a little bit too old. Met some incredible disabled individuals who then told me about the women's program in Chicago, and then told me about collegiate wheelchair basketball programs, which again, I think differ from you and Amy's experiences, because I was able to go to the University of Illinois, complete my graduate work, and had opportunities for an athletic scholarship. Luckily for me, I had already had an academic scholarship. So, but the opportunities were there. And so I think wheelchair basketball, when we look at parasport, maybe, a step ahead, but there's still so much work to be done. Moving on to question 3, and Amy, I'm going to start with you this time. Through storytelling and media coverage, it's undeniable that fans and the public have more access to learn about and watch, something which helps to shape our future generations' idea of who is an athlete and helps to eradicate stigma and stereotypes. I will be the first to say how excited I get when seeing these Visa commercials and these Hilton commercials and Nike and Toyota and TIAA, because they're our sponsors. I probably should remember to mention them. But it's so exciting because Amy, you and I joked about before we started this town hall about being in that generation where none of that really existed. And so as in all sports on every level, however, this idea is still overwhelmingly male. And so often many people picture a disabled male veteran, for example, when they think about disability and Paralympians. And I would even push it a little bit further that not only is it male, but it's always white individuals, and it's always individuals with non-disabled passing disabilities. So oftentimes amputees that have pants on, or, whether it's a hip disability or MS, something that is non-disabled passing. And so Amy, you have educated and advocated nationally and internationally for equitable and meaningful inclusion of adaptive sports. What patterns of gender inequity have you witnessed in adaptive sport and the predominant narratives surrounding? Is there a role for Title IX to play in the increase of adaptive sports for girls and women? And again, very hearty questions. So if you need me to repeat, I can do that.
Well, the simple answer is yes. Title IX absolutely has a role to play. Look, when I was president of the Women's Sports Foundation, 2007 to 2009, and it used to be that you would do 2 years and then your vice president, who was Jess Mendoza, would step in, and Jess got pregnant my last year, and so I stayed an additional year. And the materials that were produced for the gala for our events were still, diversity only meant skin color. There was zero representation of diverse bodies and athletes with disabilities until, it was something that it was a lonely place on the board to have to constantly say, guys, we gotta, there are athletes out there. There's so many. Jean Driscoll, who I met, who's a legend in wheelchair racing. I've been doing the Boston Marathon for so long. It's like there are people who are so, accomplished and have so many medals, and we're not thinking about them. And so that's all changed, thankfully. And I feel like, having representation with our trustees has been so important, but a lot of it has been this thing of visibility. And to the earlier thing where you talked about storytelling. So I grew up, first generation American with immigrant father, blue collar. Both my parents worked 2 jobs, and my dad's insurance didn't cover. Forget it. What insurance covers is literally what gets you from the bed to the toilet. That is the definition of what insurance will cover. So every set of kind of cool looking legs that I got was a hustle. It was like, I'm gonna be in, I was getting press because I was, basically, I was in this game and was the first person on these carbon fiber legs. So, it was kind of shocking for people. And they didn't really definitely didn't know what to make of it, I think, with me being a woman. And in fact, that thing of non-disabled passing, I mean, maybe it is growing up with an immigrant father, but that was the aim. That was the aim. You know, it really pained my parents that it was kind of, that anything would be obvious, that I was obviously abnormal, you know. And it really took me until my mid-20s before I was able, and it was thankfully through the experience of having to run on those running legs, which have nothing to do with human appearance. There was nowhere to hide. There's no way to pretend that I'm just like you. And you go out the other side of that and go, I'm not just like you. I'm not like anyone else. And that's a good thing. And let's all talk about what makes you different, because we all have something. So something that has changed profoundly has been this, and I, you know, it's so recent, guys. You got to think that it's 2019 that the Paralympic movement was officially folded under that the USOC became the USOPC. That's just 3 years ago. You know, 2018 that they said we're going to pay our medalists the same amount. There was no pain in 1996. So we didn't have the same uniforms. You didn't get the same swag. It was much more lonely and renegade existence. And the general attitude was like, you should be grateful for whatever crumbs you get, which I always pushed against and pushed hard against. But the fact that the visibility is different, and the fact that yes, through pop culture, the fact that we have seen so many more diverse bodies, and through the, you know, aspects of the body positivity movement, just people of all shapes and sizes saying I'm celebrating my body in all the ways that it works for me, and isn't it great? Isn't it beautiful? And that's a hard place to get to. But I feel like I'm seeing children with disabilities get there earlier than, say, my generation might have been able to. That they completely are excited about the fact that they get to design their own leg or arm or hand, or you know, I just was working with a 12-year-old who just became an amputee, and she just couldn't wait. She wanted to put crystals in her new prosthetic. She wanted to have, you know, we're trying to figure out how to put like LED lights so it can glow at night and sparkle. It's so much fun. I mean, most 12-year-old girls are in such turmoil about their bodies, no matter what your body looks like or how it functions. So I have been particularly thrilled by her lack of fear, of reticence about what other people are going to think. You know, she's excited about this next part, you know, this new body that she's wielding, and it's been very, very moving to me. But that's not without the fact that the last few decades we've just seen more and more and more. So in 1997, when I started getting, or 96, I guess, 95 press, it was very lonely. And the way you were treated was, you were a human interest story. And I fought, I will not give you the interview unless you promise me it's on the sports page. I'm not doing it. And those kinds of stands had to be made in order for people to stop patronizing us. You know, it used to be like it was very much a pat on the head, like, no, it's so great, you can win, oh, it's so good, and you can run. And then, you know, 10 years after my games, you had athletes, Oscar Pistorius comes to mind, who were so talented as an athlete that they were beating most of the people running with them with flesh and bone legs. And suddenly it became a threat. And that was a very interesting thing to experience, that suddenly the legs that had defined me as someone, as Scout said, that other people perceived to be less than and less able, became cheating, a threat. Because what does that mean? If I considered you less than me, but you just now beat me, what does that say about me? So having moved through that whole thing, storytelling is hugely important, and community is hugely important. So the fact that now Olympians, and particularly Olympians who identify as female, see their sisters in the Paralympic movement as well. And that is really important because it used to be so segregated. And it's really only in the very recent past that athletes who are, you know, on the Olympic ski team are aware of who are the Paralympic skiers, and that they train together and they know who they are and they celebrate them on their platforms and they are allies, and this is where we need to keep going, because obviously we're stronger together. And that kind of, the fact that actually it was the 2020 Tokyo Games where it was the first time in history that more women were on the Paralympic team than men, but not by much, you know, but 10 more or something, 9 more. And the United States the Olympic Paralympic Committee is the first one in the world to fold in the Paralympic Committee under the same organization. So it's very, very recent, this progress, and obviously there's a lot more to do.
Oh, thanks so much. These conversations get me so amped up. I'm a note taker, so I'm like taking notes as you both talk, but there's too many like tidbits that I want to comment on. And just be mindful of time. I'm going to continue to question 4 because I think our audience really is enjoying hearing from you too. So thank you so much for your perspectives. Question 4, and we'll start with you again, Aimee. There are many negative manifestations of ableism in all facets of our society, which affects all athletes, regardless of ability, disability. Unlike sexism and gender inequity, however, there are significantly less public conversations challenging both ableism in and beyond sport. And I will say, we will have this conversation, that oftentimes our disabled athletes are the ones perpetuating this ableist, this oppressive system. I know that. I'm guilty of that, and I've recognized that. But undoubtedly, sport and competitive play sit at a unique intersection that can expand society's perception of what disabled people are capable of, while also turning our attention toward our use of ableist language and the lack of accessibility and accommodations in our daily lives. So Aimee, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about how you envision both athletes and society's exposure to adaptive sport interrupting ableism beyond the playing field.
Well, so we, in the same way that we know how when girls play sport, if they pass the threshold of sort of 13 years old and they stay through their teenage years to around 17, 18, they will continue to be physically active in some way for the rest of their life. And we know what this means, is that if they choose to become mothers, they make better health decisions for their whole family, for their children. You know, we're talking about major ripple effects. 84, this was maybe 10 years ago, I'm not sure what the statistic is now, but it used to be that 84% of women who were business leaders in the United States played a sport. And it doesn't have to be team sports or even that formalized, you know, maybe just that you run every day, or, you know, you have a yoga practice, or, you know, you dance, but it's something that you do, and it's a time where you are in your body. And we know this, that it means so much in the development of a person, especially in the sense of leadership skills, time management. You know, to be an athlete and in school requires a lot of fortitude. So I think it's the exact same parallel to the adaptive sports. You know, the fact that you just see, I mean, I got to be the chef de mission for the 2012 games in London, which was such a thrill. And a couple years earlier, I had been asked by Channel 4 to consult for them. They wanted me to be the desk correspondent, to basically report on the Paralympics. And I was like, I don't sit behind a desk. That's not what I do. I don't want to do that. I need to be like on the ground. But I asked them, I said, could you please, you have an opportunity to change the narrative, because if the Paralympics ever even gets any coverage, which it got paltry coverage here, it is always, there's that garbage truck, sorry. It is always done in a way that's patronizing, and you can hear it. There's tinkly piano music that's supposed to stir someone's emotions, and we're training people subconsciously how to feel about a group of people. And yet they're in the velodrome in London watching a cyclist who was a triple amputee and completely visually impaired. So 3 prosthetics attached to the bike and going at nearly over 70 miles an hour. I mean, it was completely horizontal with the ground, just racing on this velodrome. And it was so thrilling for everyone. You know, people, the Paralympic Games arguably were more successful with the populace in England than the Olympics, because they were more affordable for tickets. And there's no way to not be captured and captivated by the sheer physical feat of what people are doing with their training, their discipline, and their willpower, but also with technology. You know, 100 years ago, for many of us, the option would have been begging. You know, that's the handicap. Your cap is in hand and you're begging for the charity of others. And it's something I remember often if someone says, what other time would you have loved to live in? There's no better time to be a female amputee than there is today, because we've got the technology on the rise and enough media exposure that that has wonderfully, in many ways, changed to allow the person that is being highlighted to tell us in their own words their story and their experience. And I think we have a new generation of people in the media who are also very aware of not putting a saccharine coating on a story that by its own merit is fascinating and exciting and exhilarating. So we have to we have to take responsibility in that as our own storytellers, but also when we tell others stories. And it's something when I look at your title, Patty, diversity and inclusion, there's a part of there's a movement to add an A to that: diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. And I would hope you can lobby Wisconsin to do that, because there is no diversity without accessibility. And it's something that certainly in the job in Hollywood, that's still climbing Mount Everest. There is a sudden and long overdue awakening to the need to tell the more diverse stories, and disability is still being left out of that conversation by far. And if anything, to tell you, the fact that the second actor to win an Oscar, Troy Kotsur, this past year, was in a film with the first actor to win an Oscar, which she did 40 years ago. That should tell you just how woefully behind we are in our overall storytelling capacity for what is actually a huge segment of our population. So we do need to do better on that. But there has been progress.
Absolutely. And again, so many tidbits, but like as the diversity and inclusion manager, I am very mindful that disability is often left out of our conversations. And it's funny you mentioned the A, because that is a current movement that we have at Wisconsin. So I'm really happy to hear you mention that. And for myself, having intersecting underrepresented identities, when I come into a space, I'm not only Mexican and brown, but I'm also disabled. So there are times where I feel like my disability identity, it's an identity, is being completely ignored. And so, to your point, you can't have diversity and inclusion without that access piece. And I think that's one of the many ways to begin dismantling ableism in and out of sport. One of the easiest ways to really tackle this oppressive system is to have disabled individuals in leadership roles making these decisions. We all have heard the metaphor, like having a seat at the table. I don't need the seat. I have my own chair, but I need to be at that table in order to make these decisions, because oftentimes we have non-disabled individuals making decisions about equity, about inclusion, about access, and they don't have the lived experiences or the perspectives or just the lens that a disabled individual has. So I think it's really important that we have opportunities for disabled individuals to engage at that highest level of whatever nonprofit, company, business, school, making decisions about access and inclusion.
The other thing though, Patty, to your point, is that the width and breadth of the diverse experience of people with disabilities, because it is so huge. I don't know. I mean, I have used wheelchair in recuperative instances, but I don't use a wheelchair the way that you use a wheelchair in the world. I don't know what it's like to have vision impairment. I don't know what it's like to have hearing impairment. I don't know what it's like to be an above the knee amputee like Scout is, or to have one fully flesh and bone leg, or these are just a small sampling of the physical disabilities. And so a lot of, for me, there's these little pockets, right? There's like an amputee coalition, and there's wheelchair athletes. For me, I also really desire and advocate for sort of like communication within, because a board might think, well, we have a disabled person on there and we did our job, but one person's experience also can rarely account for the width and breadth. It's a start, but I do think we also have to acknowledge that the umbrella term disability almost belies the reality that it is within itself so diverse in experience. And so even those among us who live with a disability need the opportunity to have conversations about how our experiences are the same and how they are different, and where we can advocate for each other.
Yeah.
If we do get a seat at the table, if we do get to, have that voice that needs to be bigger than our own experience.
Absolutely. I mean, I always say disability is not a monolith, and, just being engaged and following the disability justice movement, that's what they're talking about, like the community at large, and having these conversations even within our own community. Okay. Again, being mindful of time. Scout, I'm going to start with you this time. We're going to jump to our last question. We've seen a lot of change in 50 years' time. As we look ahead to the next 50 years, there are so many more stories to be told, barriers to be broken, and prejudices and isms to be diminished. And ideally, how can we eradicate this one step at a time? So in your few words, and we have just a few more minutes, what would you like to say is one change that you'd like to see take place in the next 5 years that would help break down these barriers for girls and women with disabilities in sport?
Gosh, there's so many ways to go with this, but when it comes to sports, I really want to see equal opportunities for women athletes with disabilities to compete at the Paralympics. And currently, we don't have the same number of sports for women that are offered for men, and we don't have the same number of events offered for women as we do for men. I'll just give you an example. I compete in para athletics, track and field, and there are currently 19 fewer medal events for women in track and field, the biggest sport in Paralympics, than there are for men. So you do the math, 19 times 3, and that's almost 60 less medal opportunities for women at the Paralympics, 60. And it's not just a medal. You think of the trickle down effect of what that opportunity or the lack of opportunity. It means, you know, what 60 less almost 60 less opportunities that a woman is going to be able to compete on that kind of stage, to put herself, to have that kind of platform, to make herself some sort of living, to be able to provide for herself and possibly her family, and you know, just the meaning that it gives somebody to be able to compete at the Paralympics. And so it's not just a medal, it's so much more of a trickle down effect. And while we have seen an increase in number of women participants at the games, what we're seeing is the percentage gap has only increased because they've reduced the number of events for men to make that gap a little bit closer, but they haven't increased the number of sports or opportunities for women. And so I really want to see that be a change in sport as we go forward to the Paralympics, especially as we host our next Paralympic Games in the United States. We need to see more of these women become household names. You know, I don't want there to be a Paralympic Games in Los Angeles and for the general public not to know who these stars are, who the athletes are. And I want to see the stadiums filled. And currently you go to a Paralympic sporting event in this country and it's a little bit sad, the number of people who come, and it's really just your friends and your family, but they're not local communities that are supporting. They're not, the stadiums, the events are not packed, and we only have a short 6 years to build a fan base and to build viewers. And so I think we've got to continue to push that, to push the stories, to push the athletes forward, so that by then the Paralympics is going to be a well-known, you know, it's the third largest sporting event in the world. And yet people in this country really don't know about it. And so those are things that we have to continue to make progress. And it's really great to see the visibility that's being increased, and certainly the perception that's changed through sports, but also the perception that's changed. That what people don't realize is that sports are such a great vehicle for change in how our country, society, or culture looks at people with disabilities. And seeing people like Amy on Stranger Things is helping to do that also, so that we're normalizing disability, so that people, families and kids see it and they're not afraid or shocked or horrified, but instead just curious and wanting to know more about it and starting those conversations. So that's what sport is helping to change. And I really believe we have such a great opportunity, but if we don't become a bit more aggressive and vocal and outspoken about the need to push these stores, to push the change, the opportunities, we're going to have missed a huge opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. And Scout Bassett needs to be a household name leading into LA 2028. I hope you're not retiring yet. All right, Amy, throwing it to you now. What would you say is one change you'd like to see in the next 5 years that would help break down these barriers for girls and women with disabilities in sport?
Equal media coverage. Sorry, NBC, you're not cutting it. Just, you know, you've gotten better, but what Scout is saying is rooted in one thing. It's the fact that they don't feel like there is an audience, but they make the audience. That's what Channel 4 did in England, and they had the best ratings they had of all time, and it has changed that country. It has changed the way that you know. You'll see people with disabilities in advertising no matter what time of year, and it doesn't have to even be about sports. It's just there is a different sense of community where the imagery of people with various disabilities is not only accepted, but expected. And because it suddenly comes out when you realize just how many, and people tend to advocate for their own interests, right? Or for those that's close to them. But when you realize it is your neighbor, it is, and by the way, it's going to be you one day. It's going to be you, even if it's temporary. Everybody experiences disability in some regard. And I always have, you know, a cousin call me and say, wow, I'll never look at ramps the same way, except now that I had a cast on my leg for 2 months or something like that, and needed to get around with crutches. It can be something as seemingly trivial as that, but the big corporate sponsors bear a responsibility. And you can't just use the imagery to evoke emotion. You know, it can't just be inspiring. You need to actually know, as in the last couple of years, many corporations and their PR and marketing and Hollywood too has made, like I said, a long overdue shift towards seeing much more diversity in the stories that they tell, and telling this and allowing people of color to tell their stories, and people in the LGBTQ communities. Disability is still an asterisk, and it's still kind of a subset. So that's where I think you could make the most difference in the shortest amount of time with some, it shouldn't even be bravery. I'm sorry, it's just the right thing to do. And they've done it with many other aspects of diversity, and they need to do it with disability.
Thank you so much. As we wrap up, I'd like to thank the Women's Sports Foundation team and their partners at TIAA. Thank you to the audience for participating and just engaging in this wonderful conversation. We apologize for the time and not being able to take some questions, but we really thank you for being present today. And most importantly, thank you to our amazing panelists, Amy and Scout. So much great information was shared today, so much great insight and, you know, your lived experience. So thank you for being vulnerable and sharing all of that information that you shared. For those of you who want to continue this conversation and or share this conversation, it will be uploaded to the Women's Sports Foundation's YouTube channel for your viewing and sharing pleasure. Be sure to check back on the WSF website for information for future town hall conversations and additional activations around the 50th anniversary of Title IX. Thank you so much, and have a fabulous Thursday, or like I like to call it, the pre-weekend, the weekend eve.